And we heard about Scott, when I say we, the kids I had that were Venice, Santa Monica, South Bay locals that we would, that were regulars at Palms or at Malibu. We heard about the races going on out at Long Beach, and we went out there. And some of the kids, you know, had transitioned over there. And it's like Stewart hearing about Palms Park and coming over from Whittier. And those guys, it was just kind of like word of mouth, the folks and all that stuff. And Russ was the guy there, and he showed up at Malibu with John George and a couple of kids from over there. And that was in the real, very early 70s. Yeah.
Talk about the very beginning of BMX.
In my view, yeah, that was Palms Park and Malibu. And in the very early 70s is when that took place, and it was Ron Mackler that was running the races there at Palms. And I had that little business where I was doing the bike racks and stuff, and that was in Culver City, real close to Santa Monica and West LA there. And I can't tell you how I heard about, I don't remember how I heard about these races on Thursday night at Palms. And when I went out there, there were already races going on that Mackler was running. And I'm trying to remember the kids that were there. God, there's a couple of them, I can't remember their names, that were considered the local hot shoes. And it was very shortly after I was going out there when Tom Lund and Johnny Palfreman and that bunch were showing up there. And I had the little thing going there at Bikette where I got Lund and I got Tom Finvers and a couple of kids to ride. They thought it was a big deal that I was involved with them and I wanted them on a team or anything like that. And the only thing that we offered them for uniforms, and this was the first uniforms as far as I know, I never saw anybody show up. In fact, the racing apparel of that time was Levi's and lace-up boots. The kids thought it was cool to wear leather high-top boots when they raced their BMX bike. And so they wore lace-up boots and Levi's and whatever shirt, t-shirts or whatever, no helmets or anything like that. And they raced their Stingrays or whatever the heck they had. And that was exactly what Finvers and Lund and Johnny Palfreman and all those guys were doing. And after a while, a few people heard about it, and other kids showed up. That's when Stewart showed up later, Howie Idelson, Bobby Watts, all these kids started to show up there, and Perry Kramer, and simultaneously, like I said, out at Malibu, the Dreyer brothers had a few races around their house, and the kids went out there and raced, and the trophies were handmade driftwood trophies that he painted up and stuff, and it was pretty cool. And the kids had raced between the rose bushes and stuff, and then the Dryers got a lot. We'd park our cars around the house and turn the lights on so they could see where they were going. And later, the older brother, I think it was, I'm confusing Don and Doug, I can't remember which one was which, but the older brother made a deal to get this location out in Malibu, further up in the hills. And it was actually a nudist colony where we had these races. There was an old abandoned house. We built a track that went around the house and few jumps and some good bank turns and stuff like that. And we ran the races there, and the nudists were very cooperative. That all of them would be gone or not or be dressed or whatever when the kids were all out there racing, except one old guy that insisted on laying out on his chaise lounge naked as a jaybird while the kids, but you couldn't see him unless you were looking for him. But it was part of it. And what was really cool about that place, we raced around there and stuff, and at the end of the races, we would take the kids up, load them up in the trucks and stuff, and drive up the fire roads to the top of the hills there in Malibu. And then the kids would race a mass start, and they would race down the fire roads, downhill. Guys that think BMX downhill is something new, it isn't, because they would race downhill on the fire roads and stuff. And then there was an irrigation pond on this property, and there was a bobcat, a skip loader there, and we built a ramp. Piled dirt up and made a ramp so that when you finished down at the bottom, you came down this trail, and then you dove off this bank and you rode down and you finished with this ramp jump and landed out in the lake. And so the finish was going into the lake, and it was cool. And I've got pictures of that. I don't have any movies of that. It's unfortunate. But I do have a few really lousy, anschematic pictures of the kids flying through the air and landing in the lake, and kids standing in the lake up to their chest in water and stuff. And that's the earliest part of BMX that I remember was at Palms and Malibu, and the kids, ultimately a few of them showing up from the valley, and after we'd done it quite a while, we heard about Scottsdale out there, and we went out and visited Long Beach, and some of the kids went out there and raced, and it started to snowball. Next thing you know, there were a couple tracks in Orange County and stuff, and it grew from there. But for me, the genesis was in Palms Park and Malibu, and I'm just trying to think of some of the real. Oh, I remember one time at Palms, a guy showed up who was a would-be rock promoter, and this was late. This was probably in '73 or so, and he came with his little nephew, Chucky Charbrough, and that was Chuck Robinson, and he had heard about it, and he showed up there, and for Chucky to race, and brought his nephew and stuff. And Chuck went on and was Robinson Racing and everything, and part of GT later and stuff. But he and I had an affiliation because when I after the Dirtmaster experience that I did, I was doing a lot of skateboard stuff at that time, simultaneous, and I did some product development and sales work and built a product line called Dan Gurney All-American BMX. And Chuck worked for a brief time there, kind of got his feet wet doing stuff there at Gurney and with Tommy Kamafuji. So there's a lot of, in the early days of BMX, there was a lot of guys that later became competitors that kind of worked together in one way or another. Rick Toomey working at Webco for a while, stuff like that, and later doing his Rick's Bike Shop thing and all that stuff. So it all tied together in the earliest days, and once we had that team put together and the guys like that, it kind of blew up from there, and Yamaha got involved in '74 and did the Gold Cup and all that stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, that was probably, to this date, the biggest, no, I take it back. The X Games is the biggest, quote, BMX thing, I guess, in history. But up to the time of the X Games, the Yamaha Gold Cup was the biggest BMX event, I think, in history. And that was in '74. So there was all this stuff going on before that time. There was Palms and Scott with Bums and the Dryer Boys out there at Malibu and stuff like that. And I don't know about other parts of the country because I didn't hear about anything else until after that time, when it started, NorCal kids started to come down in '73, some of them, and then at the Gold Cup, by that time, there were kids coming down from Northern California. Seriously, kids coming up from San Diego. One of the Gold Cup qualifiers was in NorCal, one of them was in San Diego. And, but I don't think it spread to other parts of the country until about that time. So I think all that early, the beginning of it was all pretty much concentrated in SoCal and right in that vicinity. By '74, it was all over the place. I mean, there were tracks in Orange County. There were tracks in the San Fernando Valley. There was, the track there in Orange, the track out back. There was the Valley Youth Center out in the valley in Van Nuys, and there was the track there, and geez, I can't think of the name of it, out in San Fernando, indoors. And there was Ernie Alexander was doing promotions then at a couple of the motorcycle play, Indian Dunes. One of the very first races that I know of that was a BMX race was at Indian Dunes. That Ernie was involved in promoting that. And he later did the NBA, and then that ultimately was acquired and became the ABA after. But that's very early time. Back in the early '70s, Ernie was involved doing the stuff out there in the valley and stuff. So, and we got involved in all of it. I mean, I was lucky enough to be in a business where we kind of played with that kind of stuff and took the kids around. Wore out a brand new van in 2 years, hauling kids around. And my own kids were involved, of course, so it added to the fun. Yeah, Bikeette was the bike rack company, and that's when I very first thought about making some parts that were for the kids' bikes, and did some handlebars and number plates and grips and so on. And while I was doing that and involved with a couple of the guys in a partnership and so on and so forth, a young fellow named Bob Phillips came to see us, and he had created a product line that was kind of like a rain cover for a bicycle, and he wanted us to help him market this product that he had created. And when he got there, he saw what I had done with the handlebars and the grips, and he got all wound up about that. He just thought that was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. And so he, in turn, we helped Bob with his covers a little bit, and simultaneously he liked what we were doing, so he was traveling, and he took some of the stuff out and commenced to sell it. And it was growing in interest to me. I mean, I really enjoyed the stuff that I was doing that was really kid related. And so we talked about it a lot, and we had a lot of creative ideas about other product that we were interested in doing too. And ultimately, I sold my interest in Bikeette, which was the bike rack company and so on, to my partners, and Bob and I got together and we created a company called Dirtmaster. And it was focused primarily on BMX. And by the way, I should point out that at that point in time, the name BMX hadn't been done yet. It was still being called stuff like bicycle motocross or biker, all kinds of names, but nobody had come up with BMX. And the person that created that term and made it popular, and I'm giving props where they belong, was a lady. Her name was Elaine Holt. And Elaine published a little paper that she had started called Bicycle Motocross News. And she was the one that coined the term BMX. And it immediately took hold and it became BMX. And originally it was a generic term for bicycle racing. And today it's all encompassing. BMX is street, dirt, vert, you name it, it's BMX and racing. Although the two don't like to admit that it's got the same roots. But anyway, Elaine created that, and she was the first publication out there getting involved, and she was fascinated by it. She was married at that time to a guy named Ben Holt, and Ben had made a little gas tank for a bicycle, and they got divorced not too long after that and stuff. And Elaine continued to do bicycle motocross news for a couple of years or whatever, and was instrumental. One of the real, in my judgment, one of the real important people in the early days, because she kind of publicized it, and all of a sudden kids were getting pictures in something, and she would go to the races at Escape Country or wherever it might be, and she had a guy helping her after a while, doing photos and stuff and working with her just for the experience, and that was Bob Osborne. This later started Wizard Publications, and Oz worked for Elaine for free. I mean, just to get the experience in doing it and stuff. So I give her a lot of credit, and one of these days they'll finally vote her into the ABA Hall of Fame where she belongs, because she was one of the people that started that. And I mentioned Oz. Everybody knows about him. You know that. And yeah.
You want to get into the SE tours, or?
Yeah, if you want to, I'll tell you a little bit how I got into SE.
Yeah.
You just briefly.
Let's get into that.
Yeah, because I was doing the Dirt Master stuff and everything, and I was doing a lot of skateboard stuff. I mean, I was making a whole lot more money on skateboards than I was on bicycles, and had an involvement in two companies. One was a skateboard company that did a lot of skateboards. I mean, we made thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of skateboards, and in fact, my first involvement with Scott. Well, my first involvement was getting him thrown out of the Yamaha Gold Cup, but we stayed close after that. And ultimately, because he was a real bright young promoter guy, we hired Scott to help us with a skateboard company, put together a tour with some skaters, and we were hooked up doing stuff with JCPenney and a bunch of other nationwide companies, and we hired Scott to put together the tour and the stuff for the skateboard company. And but in any event, we were trucking along and at another company that was making urethane products, mainly wheels and stuff for the skateboard business, and kept in kind of close touch with all of those guys, and was still very involved in the BMX stuff with Dirt Master and so on. And then I had some problems with my partner in Dirt Master, and wound it down a little bit and got more involved with the gurney stuff. Scott had gotten hurt riding, and ran into me at a trade show where I was had a display with the gurney BMX stuff, and the display included the Indy car that won Indianapolis that year, Bobby Unser driving. I had it in the booth and all this stuff, and Scott came by with his crutches, and we talked for a while, and I hooked up with him, and he became like my team captain, and from that point forward, everything that he did, I was involved with one way or another, and when he did the FMF stuff, that was kind of independently of anything that we had done before, but the gurney thing fell flat because the Japanese investors that were involved in that company, a group, decided they wanted to pull all their money out after 1 year, and it was impossible, and so the guy that had started that company just folded it up. I still had the skateboard stuff going and other things and the urethane stuff. Scott went to do the FMF stuff, and when he started SE, it was really him putting together a promotional tour for BMX, not necessarily his company, just for BMX in general. And he rounded up a bunch of kids. he called his company, the promotional company, Scott Enterprises, and then Dash Racing Division. Clever creation of his. And took the school bus, bought a school bus, loaded the kids up, and they took off on tour, selling stickers that they mooched off of everybody and T-shirts and whatever else they could scrounge. And it was very successful. And in the course of the tour, Scott, being the promoter that he is, stopped at a lot of shops, visited people. They wanted whatever the heck he was involved in. And BMX was kind of starting to happen. And Mongoose had started, and Lynn Caston and Mike out at Redline had gotten stuff going. Panda was doing things in NorCal, and what the hell was the name of that other NorCal company? Boy, I forget. Can't think of it. Anyhow, it was Mongoose stuff with a different brand. But it was happening, all this stuff, and Scott was on the road, and he had this tour, and everything was going on. And when he came back, he was all wound up, and the opportunity was there to do something. FMF had basically closed the doors on their bicycle venture, and Scott went to Bill Bastian that had made that stuff for FMF, and did basically the PK Ripper, the first generation, and wasn't called that at that time. And a couple versions, and talked to his Annie Grace and his mother, and got a little financing from them, and a little help from myself, and he started SC, and I stayed strictly in the background, helped him out one time when he wanted to buy a bunch of parts from the Japanese, and helped him with some financing on that, and that got it going, and about that time, the skateboard thing for me was winding down, and Scott had called me, and he was in a panic mode, kind of, because the company was growing like crazy, but he couldn't fund it, and he was having trouble getting product and paying his bills on time, and all the kind of stuff that happens in a young growth company and stuff. And I went out to observe. A guy had offered to buy it from him. A well-known guy in the industry, who I won't name right now because it would just cause trouble. But and Scott was in a dilemma, and I went out and sat around for a week out there at SC and saw the action, and said, "Man, you got a good thing going. You just need to get it squared away." And so I went to work with him on a partnership basis, and we straightened around some books and bills and one thing and another, and the rest is history. We got it going, and that was in late '79, early '80, and it was rock and roll for a few years, and that's how I got in SC. I was really in it from the beginning, behind the scenes, but pretty far behind the scenes. I wasn't up front. I wasn't creating product for Scott. I did consult with him a little bit when he'd have a question about something like that, but that was pretty much the extent of it. But when I did get involved with him on a day-to-day basis, I immediately became very involved with the product. The very first thing I did when I went to work there with Scott was to go down south and visit the vendor that he had making quad angles, and fired him, and because they did a crappy job, and changed all that around and stuff, and ultimately we contracted with a couple other companies in Gardena and in that area to build stuff. We ultimately bought one of those little companies and commenced to make all of our own chromoly product, the forks, landing gear, and the quad angles and stuff like that, and ultimately the OM pliers and stuff, and we did that and continued to have Race Inc. make the aluminum stuff until Race Inc. went out of business in '83, and then we brought everything in house, and we made everything from that point forward. And I always managed that, and actually was very involved in product design and everything else from the time that I got with Scott. And then anything after that point in time was intimately involved with the design and changes and stuff. So all the late model stuff was pretty much generated right in our own shop, and we created the stuff and did it. So the PKs and the Flowels and the OMs and the quads, and then the aluminum stuff and the Assassins and all that stuff, that was all out of our shop. And so that's basically my roots with Scott go back to prior to SE, because the first involvement was racing at Bum. Second involvement was getting him thrown out of the Yamaha Gold Cup, his own race. Third involvement was getting him to be our team captain at Gurney, and then being intimately involved with him after that with SE and everything that happened then. And Lynn and Mike were both cutting edge kind of guys, because they had Redline, was very involved in making really high performance motorcycle frames and stuff, mainly frames, but flat track frames and stuff like that. And they did a first class job on that stuff. And a lot of people don't realize that Lynn Caston himself was a wizard welder and craftsman. I mean, really outstanding. And so the old Redline motorcycle frames were works of art. They were really good. And so the early Redline stuff was kind of the pattern that people looked at and went, oops, we gotta start making stuff good instead of just making stuff. Because a lot of the early day BMX stuff that you see was pretty shabby. I mean, by today's standards, really shabby. And we laugh at this stuff when we see, and we get a lot of, well, you saw here in the shop, you see a lot of old frames and stuff where people will send me stuff to fix or to do something to, and we look at a lot of that stuff, our own included, and just go, oh my God, we used to get away with a lot of stuff. But the sport was, there were parts of it that was probably more extreme, but maybe not quite as hard on equipment. But there were parts of it that were not nearly as extreme today or as hard on equipment. Like, I can think of some of the downhill tracks in the early days that we raced at. They were faster than hell. They were really fast. But they weren't fast break-up equipment in most cases. There were a few of them that had some serious jumps and stuff like that, but a lot of them were just very fast. And today you've got, tracks that have some immense doubles and sections that are really hard on equipment, and the riding skills that are necessary are way different. I won't say that they're a whole lot better, because it's a different kind of a sport, but it's definitely different, and I'd say in terms of finesse and riding skills, it's much better today. In the old days, it was more like slam bam, elbows and knees and get out of the way, and in some cases just hang on and go for it. Some of the more extreme downhill tracks like Old Yarnell, fierce, amazing place. Didn't last that long because it was too dangerous. It broke things up. And Saddleback with the Bonsai was a good one. There were some extreme crashes there. The Rancho San Diego was a downhill that was really fast and pretty wicked. A few places that were really, really good. And then a lot of the tracks were kind of ho-hum compared to today. But none of the tracks today, well, I got to qualify that, because now that the X Games has got this, like the Vans Triple Crown deal going, that's serious. That is even more extreme than the more extreme of the old serious downhills, because the equipment's up to it. If we did that kind of racing on the old equipment, they wouldn't get through the first jump. It wouldn't. it'd grenade, blow up, be gone. And today the equipment's good and stuff, so the guys can go big, and it's different, but it isn't. It's hard to explain unless you saw both parts of it. And I have some pictures. I don't know, Stuart might have shown you a picture at Old Yarnell, where you came off the gate and you started down the hill, and in the middle of the hill there was a big jump. And there's a guy named Jim Emerson standing next to the jump, and Stuart is easily 10 feet over Jim's head. Jim was about 6'2", it's 6'3". And he's in full flight, all tucked in on the bike, and this is going downhill, and he probably flew another 50 feet before he landed. And I mean, it was extreme by any measure. And but that track, it only ran about a month and a half, and then they changed it because it was just too fierce. But there was that kind of, that's kind of the big air now that the Advanced Triple Crown kind of stuff is in the X Games. But it did happen back then at a few places. That was my major involvement. Of course, was just general management in the company and stuff like that. But the bus evolved out of a necessity, we thought, at the time, where we had Scott and myself and our sales manager, we sat around and we put together a budget for a summer tour and came up with a number that was stunning. Just went, oh my God, we got to do this. And at that time, a long time ago, I was a smoker, and I went out behind the building, was smoking a cigarette, would never smoke inside, and walking up and down the alley, thinking about this budget and this summer tour, and the old dead school bus was parked out in the vacant field behind the office and the warehouse. And that sounds like a big place, the office and the warehouse. It was about 3,500 square feet total. But we were back there, and the bus was back there. I was back there and thinking about this thing, and I got looking at that thing, and I thought, my God, it was a couple years ago, and this thing was running, and it went across country with a few problems. We could probably revive it. I went out, looked it over and stuff, and went back in, talked to Scott and the guys, and said, hey, we could maybe get the bus going again and stuff like that. And I did a little number crunching and figured, well, we could probably put it together for X dollars. And we had some parents at that time of some of our race kids that were mechanically talented guys. One of them owned a company where he serviced trucks and stuff. And so I recruited a couple of the dads to come over, talk to them to see if they would help me get this thing going. And so we took on the chore, and we did it in 6 weeks. And we got the bus up. The rubber was rotted. It was down on the wheels. All the glass was broken out of the windows. Bums were living in this bus. The windshield was broken out of it. It was a derelict, and still had the school bus seats in it and all that stuff. But these guys had been living in there. And anyway, we got it up, and we got it running. We moved it out of the lot, and we put it out behind the shop, and we went to work on it. And Joe Licklider, that was our sales manager at that time, and I pulled all the seats and the interior out of it and all that stuff, and just chucked all that stuff, pulled all the broken glass out and all that kind of stuff, got it down to bones, and we scrubbed the interior down, and we Zolatoned the interior of the whole thing and got it all painted and clean on the inside. And then we converted it, and this was what we did first. We made some bunk areas, and we put and installed everything in it to put a bathroom in it. So we had a toilet, and we had a sink, and we had a shower in the bus, and we put that in there. And then we put in a little kitchenette area, a little dinette area in the bus and stuff. And anyway, when we got done with the interior conversion, it would sleep 11, and it had, like I say, a little kitchenette area and a little bathroom area and stuff. And then we went to work on the outside, and that was a huge chore because it needed paint and everything else. So I recruited my 2 sons, who at that time, God, I'm trying to remember, Bobby was probably around 17 or 18 maybe not that old. I don't think he was. I think he was about 15 or 16. And Matt was a couple years younger. And I put them to work with water and sandpaper and stuff, and we sanded the entire bus out and spent about a weekend just doing nothing but sanding and working on it. And I got glass, and I installed new glass in all the side windows and stuff. And then I went to get a windshield for it, and I couldn't. It was a year too old, so I had to put a later model windshield in it. So I had to do a lot of surgery on the body to get the windshield installed and stuff like that. And took a little extra time and sweat and nervousness, and got it done. And then built the roof rack to go on the roof and all that stuff. And finished sanding it up, and one weekend painted the entire thing tan. And we did all this out behind the warehouse and the shop, just watered down the whole area and the alley and stuff, and shot it outside. Tan, put a lot of paint on it and stuff, and got that all done, and decided that it looked pretty drab. So Dave Roberts, that worked for us at the time, David taped off the SE Wing logo and did that all with masking tape, and I ran the spray gun and sprayed everything up and got the logos on it and stuff. Had one of our guys' wives did hand lettering, and then my boys and I camoed it. We camouflaged the whole thing with. I went and had some colors mixed up, and we just cut templates out of cardboard, and all irregular shapes, and desert camoed the whole thing, and everybody freaked when they saw it. It caught on, and everybody got all excited about it. We had a couple kids on that first tour that came over from Australia and New Zealand. So there were two places on the camouflage that if you looked right, you could see the camo outline of New Zealand, and you could see Australia, and then we put their names there, Tracy Kosakowski from Australia and stuff, and the kids, so the camouflage was more than just camouflage. There was a lot of stuff in there, and it was, and we just basically restored the damn thing. It wound up being what it was. We didn't have storage room on the roof for the wheels and all the odds and ends, and we put the box up there to carry that stuff, and it looked like a turret. So we put a cannon on it and did all that kind of stuff, and it even amazed us when we had a couple of the mothers come over, and the dinette table that you could pick up and store and fold the seats down to make two more sleeping areas. The dinette table had photographs all in it, and then we put the liquid like resin, that stuff that we could pour on it, and made it look like a glass top table, but it was all resin in there with pictures and stuff. It was pretty cool. And it even surprised us when we got done how good it looked. It didn't have a dash in it either, by the way. I forgot to tell you that. Somebody, I don't know who, had swiped the dash out of the damn thing. So I had to make a fiberglass dash at the same time and get that in there and put the instruments in and all that stuff. It was a nightmare job, but anyway, we got it going, and it became legendary. It was quite a piece when it got done. It had a 540 cubic inch gas motor in it, and the amazing thing about it was that it was geared extremely high. So that sucker would roll on the highway at 85 like it wasn't even breathing hard. I mean, it was a fast bus, but it was also, it was prone to overheating. The cooling system wasn't the greatest on it, and stuff, particularly at 80 plus miles an hour, where it went a lot and stuff. And so it was prone to eat fan belts and a few other things. So it broke down a lot of times, but it made it across the country a couple times, and it went all over the place. I mean, we took it up to a lot of races in NorCal and the Pacific Northwest and stuff, and the bus, ultimately Scott, or I think it was Perry actually, that was legging it, coming back from a race in Northern California, and they blew it up on the Grapevine. And we had to have it towed all the way to Long Beach. And we parked it beside the building there in Paramount, and ultimately we needed to get it out of there. Scott had stored his motorcycle in it and a bunch of stuff. It must have been 1,000 trophies in it. There were boxes of trophies and stuff stored in it. We moved it over to a storage yard, and we paid for the storage for 6 or 8 months, and ultimately the storage yard owner came to us and wanted to know if we wanted to get rid of it. We said, yeah. It's a shame too, because we could have rebuilt the engine, and it would have been, and probably done some work to fix the cooling system, and everything else on it worked fine, the tranny and all that kind of stuff. And it was just, from my personal point of view, it had been a heck of a lot of work, and I didn't care if it ever went another mile. And most of the kids kind of were burned out on it too. But today it probably would bring $1 zillion on eBay. I don't know. But anyway, that was the bus, and it went on tour, and the tour was very successful, and a lot of guys went on that tour. We rotated a lot of kids in and out of there on that tour. Some of them went for 2 or 3 weeks. Some of them went. A few of them went for the whole ride. Joe Licklider, that worked for us for the whole ride. Todd Huffman went for the whole ride. There were a few. I can't remember. I think Beckering was there the whole ride. They had all kinds of adventures. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, some of the bikes got a lot of miles on them, chasing parts when the thing broke down and stuff like that. But that's the story of the bus. It just was. It became famous. It got a lot of magazine copy, and Wizard used it as one of the pages in the calendar that year in their annual calendar. And it was more famous that year than our bikes were. And
That's cool. Let's get into the ET.
oh, the ET deal? Yeah, this is now. I gotta tell you, I can't verify 100% of this story, but this is the story that I got, and I think it's how it happened. E.T. was Steven Spielberg's first big movie. He had a very successful movie prior to that, and he had some smaller things, but E.T. was big time, and the story was fascinating, and so on and so forth. And the bicycles, as anybody that's seen the movie, were an intimate part of the movie. And Spielberg, to his credit, has always researched what he does really well. And the story that I understand, I'll be damned. That's me, I think. Excuse me. Speak of the story short was that on that deal is that what I heard is that Spielberg lived in I think in like Reseda or some part of the valley, and was on his way to the studios, and there was a vacant lot with 4 or 5 kids riding their bikes in some dirt and jumps and stuff in the lot. And he stopped and he talked to him personally. And he asked him, and there's always one kid in the bunch that's like the king of the pack, you know, the main man. And he was riding a Kuwahara. And they asked him, what's the best bikes? And the kid said, Kuwahara. And so he went to the studio or his offices and said, I want to get a hold of Kuwahara bikes. And they called Japan. Japan said, we have a company in California, Everything Bicycles, Howie Cohen. And they called Everything Bicycles. And Craig McGuire, whom I had put into the business when I had Dirtmaster back in the day, he was my salesman in NorCal. Craig was Everything Bicycles GM. And so if you're in the business, and it's probably the same in the car business or anything else, but if you're in the bike business, you're getting hustled all the time. I mean, a team back here wants you to donate something, and they're doing a raffle someplace else and they want something, or there's always somebody who wants a free frame or a bike or something. And for everybody in the industry, in the bike industry, they've been hustled 50 times by video producers or this guy or somebody doing something. And Howie had it happen to him a dozen times. But in any event, they kicked it around. They said this guy, this studio had called them, and they wanted some bikes to do a movie they were doing. And they really kicked around. They debated whether or not to do it. And Craig, to this day, says that the reason they ultimately did it was that Howie Cohen owned Everything Bicycles. And this was Steven Spielberg. Common Jewish backgrounds, man. And Howie decided, yeah, let's take a shot at it. And they made 6 bikes for them. And they wanted them painted a particular way, which was red fading to white, which wasn't a Kuhar color scheme at that time or anything like that. So anyway, they donated the 6 bikes, painted them special, stuff like that. And Arl Osborne was one of the riders. I forget who the other guys were that rode it. And but where they screwed up on a grand scale, and we talked about it. Craig called me. I went up to Everything Bicycles on Cash over there in Torrance, and we sat around and talked. And I had done a lot of skateboard business, and 90% of my business was with the mass market. I sold a lot to the skate shops and the surf shops and stuff, but I sold a ton to Kmart and JCPenney and people like that. And I talked to him about it and said, take it to the mass market. I mean, you got a natural vehicle here. You got a movie that's going to be produced and out there selling your product for you. And you go to a major big box store and you say, we've got a movie coming out and this bike's a feature part of the movie, you'll Toys R Us. My God, it's a slam dunk. But Howie's was extraordinarily loyal to the IBD, to the independent bike dealers. And had always done business with the IBD. His family had always done business with the IBD. The Cohens, were the founders of West Coast Cycle. They had Nishiki, they had all this stuff that they did that was a Cycle Pro and all that stuff. And anyway, long story short, they decided against taking it to the mass. They just did it to the independent bike dealers. And the independent bike dealer couldn't have cared less. And so they did, here they had ET bicycles, and the IBDs wouldn't buy them. And ultimately, right down the street from us at SE, a block and a half away was GJS. George Utterback and Jeff Utterback and Scott, not Scott Breithaupt, but Scott Utterback. And George was close to Howie and those guys. And when they couldn't sell the ET bikes, ultimately Howie staged containers of them behind GJS, and George had a contract to pull them apart, take all the parts off, strip the stickers, have them repainted, and put them back together and sell them as just Kuaharas. And they didn't make a dime off the deal. I mean, you talk about a blown opportunity. It was unbelievable. But that's what actually happened, is that the ET bikes got converted back to regular Kuaharas and stuff, and they didn't take it to the mass market. And I don't have any way to say, what the numbers might have been, but they would have been splendid. Would have been a lot of money. And Craig and I talked about it at the time. We talked about it, and I said, take it to the mass. And Craig knew my involvement with the mass market because he worked for me at Dirt Master, when at the same time I had Makaha skateboards going. And I was, we were making 6,000 skateboards a day, 39 months straight, 7 days a week. And it was crazy. But they blew it. And I can't think of another opportunity that was as good since, where a bike has been featured as much as those bikes were with the kids in ET. And the ET bikes died on the vine. Independent bike dealers didn't want them. Didn't matter. Crazy. And
That's a good story, yeah, it's really good. What do you think? Good stuff. Yeah.
brief synopsis of how that happened.
Yeah.
Because I had SE up as I partnered up with a Chinese company in '92, and we worked together for 7 years, but it was not a happy relationship. wasn't a bad relationship. It was just we approached the market from two different perspectives. And I felt for sure I knew how to sell BMX stuff to the independent bike dealer and what they wanted and so on and so forth, and what it took to successfully sell it to them. And the company that I was involved with wasn't really a marketing-oriented company. They were a frame building company. So their customers were other bike companies. They didn't have to deal with the consumer market. They didn't have to deal with stuff where you have to promote and market and stuff. So we had a lot of conflict. And ultimately in 99, I just left. I just said, you know what? I had a minority position in the company, a substantial percentage, but it was a minority percentage. And I just washed it and said, you know, I'll just leave. I signed documents and everything else and forfeited the trademarks and the names and everything else and said I'm gone. And didn't have a clue what I was going to do, to tell you the truth. And this was in 99. And it was just a month or so prior to Interbike. Maybe it wasn't even a month. It was 2 or 3 weeks prior to Interbike. And I thought about it for a day or two, what I'd done and stuff. Didn't know what I was going to do. And I was talking with a couple guys I knew, and one of them was Todd Huffman. And I was talking with Todd, and he says, why don't you call Gary? And I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, why? He said, well, Gary's been out of the business for a couple of years. You're out. Between the two of you, got about 500 years worth of experience in the business. And so on a lark. In fact, I didn't even call him. I said, do me a favor. Call him and see if he might be interested. He called me back the next day. He said, yeah, Gary said, why don't you get together? And so the two of us talked and said, okay, maybe we could do something together. But our first thought was we would try to buy SE. And so we arranged a meeting at Interbike, and we sat down in a private room, had the meeting and so on and so forth, made him an offer that we thought was a very fair offer. And the people, the people that were the principals in the company just poo-pooed the offer and said, no, we've got a much better deal going. And so they kind of just blew us off. And when we walked out of that meeting, just going, holy crap. I mean, this was kind of stunning because we're not talking about, you know, $10,000. We're talking a substantial deal, but we were just blown off. So it kind of pissed both of us off, to tell you the truth. We just thought this was a pretty fair offer that we made, and they blew it off. And the residue of the company, like the shop and all that stuff, they didn't have any interest in, so we made them an offer to buy the shop only because it had a lot of assets that we could use, and we decided to do our own product line. And we racked our brain for names and stuff, and came up with Alliant, being an alliance of, you know, Gary, who had founded GT, and myself, and actually Scott was involved when we first started it with and we thought, because doing SE, we thought, geez, this would be great. We get Scott back in, I would be with him, Gary would be in, we'd have a real heck of a team going and stuff. But that didn't work out. Long story short, we couldn't buy it and stuff. And so we put Alliant together and used that brand principally as our race bikes, and made the decision to basically underground market it. I mean, not go out and spend $100,000 on magazine advertising and stuff, but try to do it the same way that we did it 25 years earlier, going to the races and being involved and rubbing elbows with the kids and stuff like that. And it's been very successful doing that with Alliant. At the same time, we did the Axis brand as the dirt and street stuff, and there we haven't been as aggressive as we were with the Alliance stuff. We had a kid working for us for a while that was really involved, but he left and went up to Santa Cruz, and not Santa Cruz Bicycles, but moved up to the city of Santa Cruz, and he was really our connection to the dirt and street market, and so we've suffered a little bit there, but we'll work on that. But that's what we're doing now, and so we're in the third year. We brought in 11 models of complete bikes. this past season, and 6 of them were Alliant models, and 5 of them were Axis models, and are kind of adjusting the inventory and stuff. But continue to make here the hardcore race stuff and the hardcore dirt and street frames only that are made in USA, and so that's where we are today. I mean, still back at it, only kind of like starting over and grassroots in the shop every day, getting dirty, and brainstorming every day. What the hell are we going to do tomorrow? You know, we got to. It really is, and the difference being today, doing this is much more difficult than it was back in the day when we first did it. Back in the day when we first did it, we were competing with other made in USA stuff. Today, we're competing about 95% with product that's made either in Taiwan or mainland China. And so it's brutal in terms of margins and calculating how you're going to do it and reaching the market in a way diverse lot of ways that you didn't used to have. There wasn't an internet back in the day, and there wasn't a lot of the stuff that there is today. There weren't a half a dozen magazines. There was a magazine or two, and so it's a hugely different thing. And with Gary and I both being old ducks, it's real critical for us that we have incorporated into our company young guys that are really on the edge. You know, like our sales guy in Alliant is a AA Pro racer, and so he's right on the edge of what's happening in racing and stuff. And we've got a half a dozen kids riding dirt and street, but we don't have anybody in the company working with us yet that is a hardcore dirt and street guy. And but we're kind of close to it, luckily, because of where we're located. You know, we're right, not necessarily. I think the geographic center of it now is probably in Wichita, Kansas, because there's as much dirt and street stuff on the East Coast as there is on the West Coast, and big hotbeds in North Carolina and around Philly. That area of street riding in particular is huge. Trail riding is huge back there. Trail riding on the West Coast is getting tougher and tougher because there's so many housing developments and there's not a lot of trees. A lot of the trails back east are 4 and 5 years old where guys build them in the trees. Nobody bothers them. Out here you'll get a good set of trails that'll be up for about 3 months and they get bulldozed. And so the famous trails like Mission Trails and the Vista Trails and so many of them have just disappeared. And or they'll reemerge different, but they get bulldozed again and stuff. Hard out here. So I think trail riding maybe is a little stronger on the East Coast now than it is on the West. And street riding is the same everywhere. You know, wherever there's a rail kids can grind or a wall they can ride or something like that, they're going to do it. And with the skate parks springing up everywhere, that's a good thing. So we're getting involved with that. But that's where we are. Gary and I are doing the same thing that I was doing 30 plus years ago at different time, different place. And I'm a little moldier than I was then.